Welcome to Redefining Medicine, an intimate and personalized program that illustrates a different side of the practice of medicine. Our in-depth conversations will focus on mentors and motivators who are consistently reshaping, redefining, and rediscovering the field of medical healthcare.
I am thrilled to welcome the Knox family, Dr. Rachel, Jessica, David, and Janice Knox, here at the A4M Spring Congress. All of you are working to strategically transform cannabis in healthcare, and you're fresh off our keynote stage. I wanted to begin our conversation. Each of you have a different background in medicine. Can you share your story and training with us?
Yeah, so I trained formally in family medicine and integrative medicine. But for me, that wasn't enough. I really grew fascinated by the science and pharmacology and cannabis and the system inside of us, the endocannabinoid system, and the physiology that controls balance and healing and wellness in our bodies. And that's what I was looking for in family and integrative medicine, right? A way to help patients heal, because that's what people want to do. So this fascinating new world of cannabinoid medicine, or endocannabinology, like we like to term what we do in the clinical setting, gave me all that I felt like I needed to really help people heal. And it allows us to bridge conventional medicine and ancient healing arts and make sense of them, finally, as one sort of scope of medicine. Beyond that, I am involved in regulations. I'm the chair of the Oregon Cannabis Commission. I'm the medical chair of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. And my involvement in those bodies are because I really believe that clinicians and people of color need to be involved in the regulations surrounding the industry of cannabis and cannabis medicine. If we're not at that table when rules and regs are made, it's really hard to participate in a position of agency. And we clinicians need agency in this industry more so than ever, so that we can really help patients, the consumers, make sense of all these crazy products out there.
Fantastic. I'm Dr. Jessica. My formal training is in preventive medicine, which is a primary care and public health specialty. While learning about the endocannabinoid system and sort of backing up my family and their awesome work, I actually spent 4 years as a medical director at a telemedicine startup out of the Bay Area, but recently came back to work full-time with the family in endocannabinology. And I'm excited to be back in this space where I really feel like we are pushing strongly ahead to really revolutionize the way we think about and approach care for patients.
Yeah, I'm Dr. David. I spent 40 plus years as a board certified emergency physician, having just retired as the first of this year. And I'd have to say that up until 5 years ago, I didn't know cannabis as anything but a box to check on that infernal electronic medical record under drugs of abuse. And so this has been a very enlightening journey for me. You know, I started into it just seeing patients, and there just so much intersect with, you know, what I was seeing in the emergency room and the patients I was seeing as cannabis patients. And you know, when you really get into it for pain management, the number of patients, you know, telling me they are getting off opiates, reducing their opiates, you know, having better results in managing their care with the use of cannabis, you got to pay attention to it. And you know, so that really started my education. And the more we learn, the more we find that, you know, cannabis is one of the safest medicines there is out there. If you look at what we call the safety profile, you know, the ratio of risk to benefit, you know, cannabis has just about every pharmaceutical beat. And we want to, you know, encourage that message. You know, yes, there are cautions to it, just like any medicine. But you know, part of our job is to educate not only our peers, but the public about, you know, how to optimally use this. So that's our focus, and I'm excited to not really be retired, but to have a whole new career.
Okay, I'm Dr. Janice, and I'm probably the instigator of all of this. I spent 35 years, like I said, as a board certified, what I call drug pusher. the anesthesiologist. And even though I absolutely loved my specialty, toward the end, I didn't feel that we were making a difference. I didn't feel like I was affecting anybody other than putting them to sleep and waking them up. And one of the last things I remember coming out of the OR and looking at the patients in the recovery room, they were getting larger and bigger, and they're on pages and pages of medications. And all I can think was, is this what we're doing to America? And so when I was called out to do the clinics, and I learned about this endocannabinoid system, that set me on this road. I felt great about it because I was starting to learn something again, my brain was working again, and it was the most fascinating topic that I really believe we're only scratch surface, tip of the iceberg. And I would love to see my experience as an anesthesiologist and now an endocannabinologist take this to a whole new level for all healthcare providers. That's my goal. That's what holds me here.
So let's talk a little bit about the endocannabinoid system, which you just mentioned. How do you understand this system, and why isn't it part of the traditional medical school curriculum?
Let me start off by saying, we certainly, when we came through medical school, I'm not going to say the year, certainly didn't get the endocannabinoid training. It's more inexcusable to me that someone who graduated as recently as my daughters did not get this information. This information was available since the late 80s, right? So when you think about how we need to approach this science, if we want to get other healthcare providers, regardless of what their little initials are behind their names, letters behind their names, we need to be able to make them understand that this is a science first, that it really isn't about cannabis. It's about that physiology that we're just scratching the surface again. It changes every day, what they're uncovering and telling us this is the new picture. I would love to see us be able to push that as a specialty, the study of the endocannabinoid system.
Well, I have my theories because it validates the use of whole plant medicine, and that's what, the pharmaceutical companies of old meant to get away with, right? When we went to these monomolecule synthetic drugs in the early 20th century, plants weren't patentable. They didn't make any money, but these synthetics were. And the modern medical system, as we know it, was built upon that model, the pharmaceutical drug science model. There's no place for plants and whole plant medicine or whole food medicine in that model. So I do believe that this information has been intentionally withheld because it validated plant medicine, it validates ancient healing modalities like acupuncture and massage and meditation and deep breathing and grounding, etc. You name it. But what's really interesting right now is that we don't have to validate it. People are. Consumers, they're turning to natural substances all on their own. They're using essential oils, whole plants, whole foods, cannabis, if it's legal in their state. They're choosing it instead of a pharmaceutical drug. We felt very strongly that yet and still there needed to be clinicians who could support consumers or patients in their use so that they're not out there just using stuff and potentially being harmed because of that, because the market is taking advantage of them, right? And yet and still they would come to us anyways and say, how do I use this product? Healthcare providers need to know something about the phytochemicals and the pharmacology of those chemicals in those plants, especially when the average American is on that laundry list of prescription drugs that it might interact with.
And let me add too, I think it's really important to say that it's no longer acceptable for us healthcare providers to say we don't know anything about it, or there's not enough research, or it's not good enough for us to do that anymore. Our patients are coming to us and they're asking. They're not asking for our permission to use it. They're asking for our help and for them using it safely. And until we convince healthcare providers it's about the science, let's understand the science, then I think you'll see a big changes that way as well.
Can you talk a bit about where the endocannabinoid system lives in the body? It sounds complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated, and the answer is everywhere. Now, the conventional thought of the ECS system, it includes our CB1, CB2 receptors. Those are the primary first identified receptors. And they did it by radio tagging synthetic THC, Marinol. And majority of the CB1 receptors were in the central nervous system, but it's also in the peripheral nervous system, which essentially goes everywhere in the body. And most interesting thing about it is that there's a very scant amount of CB1 receptors in the brainstem. So this is critical when we're talking about potential for overdosing, combination with other sedative medications. You know, that area is a spare. There's no respiratory or cardiovascular depression. CB2 receptors, the other main type, they seem to be most predominant in the immune system. We've got lymph nodes all over the body. You know, the immune system, it's in the spleen, you know, essentially reaches all organs. I'm sorry?
Tonsils if you still have them.
Yes, yeah.
But literally everywhere.
Exactly. More we're finding, every cell has receptors that can be affected by the endocannabinoids.
The mitochondrial membrane
has
cannabinoid
PPAR
receptors.
and you know, vanilloid receptors. I mean, these are all, I'd never heard of them before. You know, lipid raft receptors, and you know, the multitude of systems that are directly affected, you know.
Another important component of the endocannabinoid system is our own endocannabinoids, those actual ligands that will key into those receptors. Turns out those endocannabinoids don't just work on our cannabinoid receptors, they're working on other receptor systems throughout our body, whether that's serotonin or dopamine or vanilloid, as he just mentioned. And that really sort of amplifies the power of the endocannabinoid system because it's cross-talking against everything.
But that's always a question. Why does it work on so many diseases? The question is exactly that. Those receptors are everywhere.
Well, phytocannabinoids work on those receptors. So that's why cannabis seems to work on so many things.
Right. Yeah. As far as our endocannabinoids, some folks maintain that the uterus has the highest concentration of anandamide in the body.
So you all have breached this field of cannabis and healthcare, and you now have your clinic. How did you get started from the business point of view?
Yeah, well, I think in the quintessential card clinic where patients come just to get an authorization for use, it's, you know, a clinic where patients come in for 10, maybe 15-minute visits. You assess their history. If they have a diagnosis that their state deems is acceptable for cannabis use, you just check a box. That's really it. And then you're on to the next patient. But in that 10 to 15 minutes, these patients have so many questions, right? And for the clinician who doesn't know anything, I mean, that could be a really humiliating and humbling experience. And the way, and the way we reacted to that was hit the science. Like, there's got to be something, and there are tens of thousands of research papers in preclinical trials, and even some clinical trials that showed us how to pragmatically approach the use of cannabis for these patients. And so we understood that it's not this 10 to 15 minute visit that's doing these people any service. We really need to embrace this and be the support system in our community to help talk through using cannabis for specific conditions based off what the science is saying, right? And we felt like it was our due diligence as clinicians to be that support. Like she said, it's not enough for us to say we don't know, there's not enough information or any of that. There's plenty of information, and we've been taught physiology. We've been taught pharmacology. Who was better at analyzing and assessing and then synthesizing this information for the patient or consumer? That is us. So we felt very strongly that was our job to do anyways. Patients and consumers are using it now. We need to be here now. And so we wanted a safe place where patients could come and have comprehensive conversations and direction and even oversight if they wanted, you know, somebody to hold their hand.
Exactly, and I think as physicians, this is what we as physicians do anyway.
Right.
When a patient comes to us and asks us questions, if we don't know the answer, we're supposed to go look it up and come back. It's no different in the world of cannabis medicine. And so, as Rachel said, patients are out there using cannabis. Whether you like it or not, or know about it or not, it is our responsibility and professional, ethical duty as physicians to go learn so that we can help take care of our patients.
And one more, Ellen, I like to drive home as well. One of the things that I think cannabis has done for all of us is brought us back full circle that it is about the N of one. It is about that individualized person's need, because the endocannabinoid systems are starting off in different places. Our external assaults to the body, the toxins, traffic, relationships, all affect us differently. We're at different ages, maybe on different medications. So it really is all about who that individual is. And medicine should have always been that way. And that allows us in the clinics to start not only thinking that way for ourselves, as more and more is discovered and we come to more and more realization how special this can be and should be, and we should embrace and push that it should be, that we can give patients that place to help them learn more about the endocannabinoid system and the phytocannabinoids. We want them also to take responsibility for their health by talking to them about lifestyle changes and all those things. And you have to have the time and the place to do that. And so we were trying to create a model that's disruptive, but at the same time delivering what needs to be delivered.
Yeah, I think in my history with the program, I started out very naive. And thankfully, a majority of the patients you were actually seeing in these clinics, the medical programs had been around for 15 years virtually before I got started in it. These patients knew what they were doing. They were teaching me, about what was working for them. And, but as it became more apparent, are they using their cannabis optimally? And, so they're asking for some directions, dose, and, they're still talking strain and that type of thing, so that it was really an impetus to learn. And I think now as we see, cannabis becoming much more aware in the public eye, we're seeing totally naive patients come in, newly diagnosed with cancer, for example, or they got multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease. They never used it before, but they've heard about it, and they want to know about it. How do you use it? And so that's kind of the evolution from being taught to now, hopefully we've got the resources and the knowledge to really teach the patients about how you should be using it.
Dr. Rachel, you in particular, but really your whole family, work to address the minority disparity gap in healthcare. Can you talk a bit further on this theme and if cannabis is a potential solution?
Gosh, so the disparity gap that we're talking about is the minority health disparity gap, and it is prevalent in all communities of color. And what this gap is identifying is the differences between people of color and their white counterparts in the type of care that they receive, the quality of care that they receive, and the outcomes. People of color, specifically Black people, are twice as likely to develop diabetes and die from those complications. I believe it's the same rate or similar rate with high blood pressure and cancer as well. That shouldn't be the case. But what we know is that the leading causes of death in this country, that's what, heart disease, cancer, stroke,
Diabetes.
those are all preventable and reversible diseases with a common root cause, with inflammation. And so it's very important in the communities of color to start considering something different than what conventional medicine is offering. Conventional medicine is failing them at twice the rates consistently. And through Healthy People 2010 and Healthy People 2020, we have not dialed it back. Yeah, that needle has not ticked, not one bit. If anything, it's getting worse. And so with the Minority Cannabis Business Association, our focus really is on restorative justice and social justice. And with my committee, the medical committee, my sister is on that with me, it is to talk about equity and restorative justice from the lens of health. Health is equity too. It's probably the type of equity that's the last to consider. But if you're not healthy, you can't do anything. You can't hold a job. You can't hold a job in the industry. You got to be healthy first. We have to talk about how, two things. The money that's coming from the tax revenue in legal states can be used to go directly back to those communities that have been most harmed by specifically cannabis prohibition or the war on drugs, right? I call that reparations. I'm not afraid to use that word. The cannabis industry should absolutely pay and provide reparations into these communities. That doesn't mean give all people of color jobs in the industry. No, that's revitalizing communities at the ground up so that these people can thrive. But on the flip side, how can cannabis be used as medicine in these communities? And I think communities of color, man, they have been so devastated by the war on drugs and cannabis prohibition that they're least likely to consider cannabis as a medicine. They don't want to go to jail. Even in legal markets, they're afraid to use it. But we know that cannabis has phytochemicals that are very strongly anti-inflammatory. Again, inflammation being the root cause of our leading causes of death. So our mission through the Minority Cannabis Business Association is, it's lofty. Our goals are lofty. We have to literally change people's minds. Like, forget these legislators who are making these rules. How do we change the mind of consumers or potential patients who depend on a system that isn't working for them? So it's having those sorts of conversations.
There is so much to discuss in this field of cannabis and medicine. When you look to the future, what is your goal, say in the next 1 and the next 5 years, and integrating cannabis into healthcare?
Yeah, I have a quick one. That the endocannabinoid system is taught in medical school. I really hope to see it as the overarching basis of health education. You can still talk about subspecialties, but in the context of the endocannabinoid system, because that's the system that connects them all. So I would really like to see a paradigm shift in the medical education, the curriculum. Yeah.
I think a medium-term goal is to educate as many people as much as possible, whether it's other healthcare professionals, because we're going to get this curriculum into medical schools, or it's legislators and policymakers, or cultivators and product manufacturers and dispensaries. The whole ecosystem needs to be educated and informed about, even if it's just the basic science of the endocannabinoid system and cannabis medicine, because without everybody being educated and informed in those things, we're going to continue just having products, just stuff, or regulations that aren't actually supportive of what we know to be true and scientific. Right. And so we need all of these stakeholders to be informed so that we create a better industry.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to education across the board. When we talk about cannabis medicine, we're talking about all the elements that come together to feed our endocannabinoid system. All the tools that we can use, and when you look at the politics, the policies, economics, big pharma is interested in it big time because they think there's a lot of money in it. But what kind of products are they looking at putting out? And PDOX got approved because it does have benefits and efficacy. They were able to demonstrate that. But it's an isolate. It's just CBD. And what we've learned is that really to be an effective product, you got to have all the entourage involved in that. The other thing Big Pharma is looking at is how do you take a molecule, modify it a little bit, it's going to be more efficacious for this problem. But when you look at the complexity of the endocannabinoid system, you always have a higher risk that you're going to have an adverse effect somewhere else. And the synthetic products that have been put out there, that's exactly what we see. Worst profile for side effects, because it's pure synthetic THC. And you combine it with CBD and other terpenes and stuff, it's much more tolerable to the body. You often get better results at a lower dose. And so, Big Pharma is kind of counter to that. A couple more comments on the essentially isolate products that have been put out there. Rimonabant, that is going to be great for weight loss. Then you get uncontrolled depression and suicidal ideation. That's what took it off the market, because there's so much going on there, with the anandamide, your bliss molecule, you're missing that. You're going to make things worse. When you look at the synthetic cannabinoids, K2, spice, these are toxic for a reason, okay? They were man-made molecules. Yes, they have 1,000 times the affinity for your CB receptors. I think, oh, that's going to make it much. They're great for studying the system. But, when you look at the natural system, anandamide, even THC, they have only a mild to moderate affinity for those receptors. And then they're balanced with the other components. Right? So it's kind of like I've heard this analogy with Joe Dulce on one of his podcasts, that it's like you turn on a bright light, okay? Now, if it is only rheostat goes up so far, you get a certain effect, right? If you ramp it up and you hold it there, you're going to burn things, basically, okay? So that's kind of the analogy that, the synthetics, they might try to be more specific. You're going to have a hard time getting there when you look at the complexity, and you're just going to have that much higher risk of damage effects. So, why do we need to go to those when we have a plant that has been proven time and time again to be extremely safe and efficacious?
Yes, especially at the number of chemical varieties that we have. I mean, really, can Big Pharma conceive of all the chemical varieties that might be necessary to care for individuals?
Yeah.
I mean, nature already does that.
Yeah.
Nature, whole food, whole plant medicine and nutrition already does that.
Yeah, and as our mom said already, sort of, we think that's where the grander future of all of this is going. Back to the N of one, the individual patient, where they might need any particular thing across this giant spectrum of what nature has given us in the cannabis plant and botanical medicines in general. And so when we think about that N of one, that individual patient, what we want to be able to give them is something from this whole plant medicine spectrum, because that might be just what they need.
Yeah.
Amazing work. I wonder what it's like every day in the clinic with you guys. Good doc, bad doc. Sisters fighting over scrubs. Never! It'd be like that with my sister. Really beautiful to see, and we're honored to have you here at the Forum event. Thank you for coming all this way, and we hope to see more from you.
Thank you.
Follow
Thank you
you.
very much.
Follow you.